Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka nabina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and good afternoon or good evening, and welcome to the Monday meeting. So today, inshallah ta'ala, we are going to do our best to provide a summary of chapters 24, 25, 26, and 27 from Kitab, at-Tawheed. And these four chapters are the first in a series of chapters that make up a section wherein the Imam presents examples of matters which are munafin at-Tawheed. They are munafin at-Tawheed, or incompatible with at-Tawheed. So basically, there's this section where he mentions a number of chapters, an extensive number of chapters, as we'll see. And what all these chapters have in common in this section is that the issues that are addressed there are munafin lit-Tawheed. They are incompatible with the Tawheed. Some of them are entirely incompatible, and others are only partly incompatible. In other words, some of the issues that he mentions are things which completely nullify a person's Tawheed and remove them from the fold of Islam, while others diminish a person's Tawheed and render his Tawheed or her Tawheed lacking in completeness and integrity, but do not nullify it entirely. So this is the section that we have entered now, and there are four chapters which we hope to summarize today, because they all kind of revolve around the same issue, and that is the issue of sorcery. So the reason why the Imam brings this section generally, and these chapters specifically dealing with witchcraft and sorcery, etc., is that these are some very, very important issues as it relates to a Tawheed. And they are issues, some of them, that Muslims, some of them, perhaps many of them, engage in without realizing the danger that these issues represent, without realizing that some of these issues can totally nullify their Tawheed, nullify their Islam, or that they can severely and significantly diminish their Tawheed and diminish their Islam. And so these four chapters, as I said, are four chapters where the Imam talks about, or they're related to, the subject of as-Sihr, sorcery, witchcraft, and some of the practices which are related to those two things as in Islam, like divination. And we're going to talk about what divination means, right? Divination has something to do with foretelling or predicting future events. So what we're going to do this evening, inshallah ta'ala, is provide a summary of the content of these chapters, as opposed to how we typically operate, is that we would go chapter by chapter, read everything in the chapter, comment on it. As opposed to doing that, because of the close relationship between these chapters, we're going to try, in the time that we have, to summarize the contents of the four chapters instead of taking each one of them individually. So let's start. The first thing, let's look at definitions. So the word is sihr. The first chapter that the Imam brings is the chapter in which he says, Ma ja'a fi sihr. The chapter regarding what is said regarding sorcery. Then he follows that with the chapter Bayanu shay'in min anwa' as-sihr. He says a clarification of the various forms of sorcery. So first he gives you the ruling of it, what Islam says about it, what Islam says about the one who practices it. Then he gives you different types of it, things that you might not consider to be from sorcery. He lets us know that those things are in fact, from the Islamic point of view, considered from a sorcery. And then he mentions a branch of a sihr that many people would not necessarily connect with it, which is al-kahana, which is fortune telling and divination and predicting the future, etc. He says, Ma ja'u fil kuhan wa nahwihim. What has been said regarding the practices of divination and the like. And then he follows that with Babu ma ja'a fil nushra, the chapter regarding curing or treating magical spells with magical spells, right? So he gives these 4 chapters, and inshallah ta'ala, we're going to try to summarize the contents and address the issues he addressed in all 4 this evening. Now, Maghrib is about 7:10. Okay, so we'll try to wrap up at least 5 till 7 and give some time for discussion and questions, because there probably like to be some questions. So let's start out with some definitions. As-sihr, in the language of the Arabs, from a linguistic point of view, is ma khafiya wa latufa sababu. It is everything that is considered clandestine and its root cause is not easily discerned, or it is totally indiscernible. Again, everything that is clandestine and its root cause is not easily discerned or is indiscernible. That's what it is in the language. Now you got to understand that encompasses a lot of things, doesn't it? Everything that's clandestine and you don't really understand its root cause, or its root cause is something which is indiscernible. That encompasses a lot of things, and we're going to see some examples of that, right? So this linguistic meaning, it would encompass things that from an Islamic perspective, an Islamic legal perspective, are not considered sihr, not considered magic in what? In the legal sense. I'll give you some examples. So one is like, for example, the optical illusions and the tricks that are played on the eyes of the onlookers by people who practice sleight of hand, right? You know, the people who do like card tricks, or a person who will say, look at this quarter. And then they'll do something and it'll make it seem as if what? It was in their hand and now it's not in their hand. And then they'll put their hand behind your ear and they'll say, look, here's the quarter, right? Like it came out of your ear. Sleight of what? It's just what? It's just sleight of hand. That they have gained a certain level of skill and acumen at what? At making you think, for example, that the coin is in the palm of their hand, when in reality it's what? It's between their fingers, right? And then when they reach behind, they're so crafty that they're able to drop it into the palm of their hand, and then what? And then bring it out like that. Sleight of hand. Now, from a linguistic perspective, that's called what? Sihr. That's called magic. It's called sorcery. Another example is the acts of a namam. A namam is the one who sows dissension between 2 people by going to one of them and telling them something which the other one said. Perhaps something they actually said, but doing what? Embellishing it, sensationalizing it. Or making something up, wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, or making something up totally that they didn't say, and using that to do what? To sow discord. That also would be considered what? A sihr from the linguistic perspective. Another example, at-Fadl.
Are these definitions in one of these particular chapters, or you're just going over?
No, they're actually, some of them are referred to in the chapters actually. And we're going to see, as we quote some of the ahadith, you'll see some of the ahadith and athar are in there actually. They're actually in there. But not all of them, but some of them are. Another one, which would fall into the linguistic category, as well as the legal category, is summoning the aid of devils or evil spirits by currying favor with them through various means. So some people will actually seek help from the shayateen to achieve certain things, to do amazing things, extraordinary things. But in order to do that, they have to do what? They have to curry favor with them. So for example, the shaitan may say, the devil that they're using or that they are cooperating with may say, slaughter a rooster. Slaughter a rooster in the name of what? Of this false deity, right? And spill its blood over this, right? Or, wrap this pig's heart in string, right? And wear it around your neck, whatever it is, right? So the shaitan will make them do something to curry favor in exchange for the shirk or kufr that they do. The shaitan will do what? Will work for them or will do something for them that gives people the impression that they have extraordinary power. And then last but not least, from the examples that would fall under the linguistic meaning, is when people what? They manipulate the appearance and makeup of animate or inanimate objects. So for example, a person who turns dust into what? into gold, turns a person into a donkey. And these are the things that no human being can actually what? Can actually do. Can actually do. This is the form of magic which there's no haqiqah, there's no reality to it. But sometimes we can be made to believe that we're seeing things that we're not actually seeing. So this last one, but all of these, what they all have in common is they fit the bill or fall under the umbrella of that broad linguistic term for, or broad linguistic definition for as-sihr. طيب. So these linguistic meanings have also been used in the Quran, have been used or referenced in the Quran. So for example, we said one of them is al-khadi'ah. It is treachery. It is sleight of hand. It is optical illusions. It's making you think you see something that you didn't see. Allah talks about that in the Quran. So in the verses where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about how when Moses, rahimahullah ta'ala, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he came, and he came with these miracles that resembled the sorcery of the sorcerers, Fir'aun gathered his sorcerers and said, basically, duel with him, outduel him in sorcery. You guys are my main guys, outduel him in sorcery. So they had this competition. And they said to Moses, they said, which one of us is going to go first? So Moses said, you go first. Let's see what you have, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in certain ayat, for example, in Surah Al-A'raf, He mentions that سَحَرُوا أَعْيُنَ النَّاسِ وَاسْتَرْهَبُوهُم وَجَاءُوا بِسِحْرٍ عَظِيمٍ. سَحَرُوا أَعْيُنَ النَّاسِ, they bewitched the eyes of the people. They did something to make them think that they were seeing something that they weren't seeing. وَاسْتَرْهَبُوهُم. And they struck fear in them, terror in them. With what? With their sleight of hand, with their optical illusions, but there was no what? There was nothing real about what they did. And in Surah Taha, in the 20th surah, he said, تَخَيَّلُوا إِلَيْهِ مِنْ سِحْرِهِمْ أَنَّهَا تَسْعَى. He said that they took their staffs and they threw them down, and then they gave this illusion from their magic, or by way of their magic, to give the impression that what? That their staffs were moving, but their staffs weren't moving. Okay? طيب. I don't know if you guys have ever seen, there's a firework. There's a firework that when you throw it on the ground, it grows and moves like a snake. I don't know if you light it or you throw it on the ground. I'm not sure. But I don't know if you guys have ever seen that firework before. You never seen it? It's you guys have seen it before. So it's a firework. You either light it or you throw it on the ground, and it does what? It starts to move like this. Obviously, it does it for a few seconds, and then it fans out. But it starts off like a ball or something, and then it what? It would be something like that. They did something like this that give the people the impression, oh, wow. But there was no reality to it. طيب, so this is one example mentioned in the Quran. طيب, as far as an-namam, the one who carries gossip, the tale carrier, there's a statement from Ibn Mas'ud in which he said, أَلَا هَلْ أُنَبِّئُكُمْ مَا الْعَضْحِ. He said, shall I not tell you what constitutes sorcery? Shall I not give you the most perfect example of sorcery? He said, هِيَ النَّمِيمَةُ الْقَالَةُ بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. He said, it is the false rumors which are repeatedly relayed to cause disputes between people. Because what happens when this person goes to this person and tells them this, and they go to that person and tell them that? Two people who are like best friends become what? Become bitter enemies, right? It has an effect. It has an effect on them, a magical effect, where you would never believe that these two people would be enemies, and they become enemies, right? طيب. Let me see. طيب, we also mentioned seeking refuge or seeking aid from the shayateen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the end of Surah Shu'ara, the poets. He says, هل أنبئكم من تنزل هل أنبئكم على من تنزل الشياطين تنزل على كل أفاك أثيم. He says, shall I not inform you of those upon whom the devils descend? Those who give their aid, or the devils give their aid to. They give their aid to kullu afakin athim, every sinful liar, meaning what? The sorcerers, right? طيب, so these are examples from the Quran that support some of the linguistic meanings that we said, or give examples of the linguistic meanings that we provided. طيب. What about a sihr from the Islamic terminology, from the Islamic point of view? So Ibn Qudama, he gives a definition of it. He basically says it is like spells, incantations, and knots, which affect the spirit and the body to the extent of causing illness and even death, separating between a man and his wife, and endearing one spouse to another. These are some of the forms of magic: spells, incantations, things that they recite, things that they say, and sometimes what? Pieces of material that they use, that they will blow on, or that they will wrap up and say these incantations on to what? To cast a spell. And these spells that they cast and these knots that they blow on can affect what? Can affect the person's spirit, can affect them, meaning internally, or affect them what? Physically, to the extent of causing illness and even death. Separating between a man and his wife, making a man who loved his wife no longer what? Love his wife. Or making a man who became disinterested in his wife, endearing her to him. And people do this even in the Arab world today, and perhaps in other parts of the world. They will actually go to witches. If, for example, if a woman feels that her husband is becoming disinterested, he's thinking about taking, for example, another wife, they'll go to a witch and ask that person to put a spell on their husband, so the husband will what? Will love his wife, and also will lose interest in other women, or even be unable to be intimate with other women. And so this is something that it exists, and people try to actually engage in it for their own personal benefits. What is the ruling of this legal sihr, right? The legal sihr, the one that Islam talks about from a legal sense. It is haram. Magic, sorcery, in its legal forms, or the forms that Islam legally refers to, is prohibited bi ijma' al-Muslimin. It's something which is totally prohibited by agreement of the scholars, without exception. And there's a number of evidences that support and point to this ruling. One of them is the hadith of Bukhari Muslim on the authority of Abu Hurairah, in which the Prophet said, "Ijtanibu as-sabil mubiqat." He said, avoid the 7 destructive sins, the 7 major sins, the sins that if you commit them can do what? Can totally what? Rip your religion to shreds. So they asked him, وَمَا هِيَ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ? What are these 7 destructive sins? And he began to mention them, to list them. And the first 2 he mentioned was ashirku billah was sihr, associating partners with Allah and sorcery. So he mentioned it from what? From the major sins, right? So it is haram bi ijma' al-Muslimin. طيب, the next point I want to make is that magic, it's real. The magic that Islam prohibits is what? It's real. It's not something that we say, oh man, it comes as hocus pocus and it's nonsense. We shouldn't believe in that. This is just superstition. It's not something Muslims should believe in. No, it is real, and it has real what? Real effects. And some of these magicians become very skilled. And you also have to think many of them seek the aid of forces that we don't see, the jinn. They seek the aid of these jinn, and those jinn can do what? They can impact us in ways that we don't realize. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّهُ يَرَاكُمْ هُوَ وَقَبِيلُهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا تَرَوْنَهُمْ, talking about the shaitan. He says, he and his minions see you while you do not see them. You can't see what effect that they're having on you. And so to support the fact that sihr, magic is real, we can look in a number of places. First of all, toward the end of the Quran, Surah Al-Falaq, the second to the last chapter of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمِن شَرِّ النَّفَّثَاتِ فِي الْعُقَدِ, right? And say, I seek refuge in those witches who blow on what? Blow on knots. They cast spells by blowing on knots. Allah is telling us to seek refuge in them. If there's nothing real about it, if they can't cause you any harm, why would Allah tell us to seek refuge from them, right? Also, the Prophet ﷺ was affected by what? By magic, as we find the hadith of Bukhari Muslim on authority of Aisha, that the Prophet was affected by what? By magic. Also, we can look in Surah Al-Baqarah, which is the second chapter of the Quran, verse 102, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He talks about Sulaiman, his kingdom, and how it was infiltrated by devils who practiced magic that they learned from two angels who were sent as a trial. And I will mention the ayah in English just for the sake of time. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says what means. They instead followed the magic promoted by the devils during the reign of Sulaiman. Sulaiman did not disbelieve, but rather the devils disbelieved by teaching magic to people. Now notice, he said Sulaiman did not disbelieve, but the devils disbelieved by teaching magic. Tells you that magic, some of it is kufr. Some magic is what? Is actually disbelief. Then he says, along with what had been revealed to the two angels, Harut and Marut in Babylon. The two angels never taught it to anyone except after saying, we are only a trial for you, so do not abandon your faith. فَلَا تَكْفُرْ. Again, if you practice this magic, if you learn it and you practice it, you'll what? You'll disbelieve. Then, but people went on and learned magic that caused a rift between a husband and his wife. Shows you magic is what? It's real because they practiced a form of magic that had an effect. An effect that it did what? An effect so significant that it would cause a man to no longer what? Be interested or attracted to his wife. Then Allah says, وَيَتَعَلَّمُونَ مَا وَلَقَدْ عَلِمُوا لَمَنِ اشْتَرَاهُ. I'm sorry, that's not the part. It says, يُفَرِّقُونَ بَيْنَ الْمَرْءِ وَزَوْجِهِ وَمَا هُمْ بِضَارِّينَ بِهِ مِنْ أَحَدٍ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. Although their sorcery could not harm anyone except by Allah's will. Meaning, if Allah willed it and allowed it, it could what? It could harm them, which means what? It's real. It's not something imaginary, something we can just blow it off and ignore it. It is something real and has tangible effects. طيب, now, what is the relationship between as-sihr, this magic of blowing, tying knots, and making these incantations? What's the connection between that and divination? Predicting what? Future events. Or speaking about the unseen, whether in the past or in the present or in the future. Well, the Prophet ﷺ, he said in the hadith collected by Abu Dawud and authority Ibn Abbas, he said, من اقتبس شعبة من نجوم فقد اقتبس شعبة من السحر زاد ما زاد. He said, whoever acquires a branch of astrology. What is astrology? It's using what? The celestial bodies, celestial objects to determine what will happen in the future. You guys see that? So the Prophet is calling that, he says, whoever practices this astrology has learned a branch of what? Of magic. He called it what? A branch of magic. The more he learns, the more sin he adds to his record. And Imam Ahmed, rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, Al-Arraf tarafu min al-sihr was-sahiru akhbath. He said, the diviner is a branch of sorcery. The one who tries to predict future events is a branch of sorcery and witchcraft, although the sorcerer is more wicked. The sorcerer, the one who practices magic, is worse than the one who just what? Who just tries to predict the future. And why do you guys think that is? Why do you think that is? Why do you think that the sahir, the sorcerer, and Imam Ahmed says he's worse? They're both what? From the same family, but the sahir, the sorcerer, is worse than the one who tries to predict the future or claims to have knowledge of the future. Because what does the sahir try to do? He tries to what? To harm people with his sihr. And what does Allah say? He says, يُفَرِّقُونَ بَيْنَ الْمَرْءِ وَزَوْجِهِ. He tries to what? Separate between a man and his woman. They typically, the witch, when he does witchcraft, does harm to people, harms people. Whereas the person who's predicting the future is just trying to what? Trying to eat. And it's not necessarily trying to harm anyone by what? Trying to find out or predict things or tell you about things that are from the unseen to get to what? To earn money. Generally does not hurt others. And that's what makes the sahir akhbar. طيب. What is the link? What is the link between the two? The link between the two basically is that what they all have in common is that they impact others in a way which is what? Indiscernible, inexplicable. They impact others in a way which is indiscernible. We said, what did we say that the sihr was in lugha? It is kullu ma, it's kullu ma khafiya wa latufa sababu. It's everything that is clandestine and it's what? Inexplicable or it's indiscernible. طيب. All right, let me quickly talk about the forms of divination. Like in Islam, divination and trying to predict future events or claiming some level of knowledge of the unseen, there are different forms of it. And those forms are determined by the means, the method that the diviner uses to supposedly learn about the unseen. So you have something called al-Kahin, which we could translate as the diviner or the soothsayer or the prognosticator, like Nostradamus, right? Someone who claims to predict future events, possess knowledge of the hidden secrets, and the ability to perceive the unseen. To basically say Queen Elizabeth is going to die in this year, and she is going to be succeeded by her son, Charles, right? And they'll have, basically, he'll claim to have had this knowledge or to have this knowledge in the future of what? Something which will happen in the future, some future event, etc. That's what? Al-Kahin. The next one is Al-Arraf, which is basically the fortune teller. And this is the person who claims to have the capability to secure certain knowledge of personal concern, matters related to personal concern. So, for example, let's say a person came and they said, someone stole a family heirloom from me. I want to know who stole it. And I want to know the whereabouts of this item, right? It was my dad's watch, my mom's ring, right? My sister's necklace, okay? Or my grandmother's necklace. So they go to someone called an Arraf. And that person will claim to be able to tell you where it is and who stole it. Or if something is lost, tell you where the lost thing is. Or if a person's husband or wife was unfaithful, to tell you who the mistress is, right? Who the mistress is or who the lover is. This person claims this knowledge, and why does he learn this? He learns this through the qareen. His qareen, the partner from the jinn, will speak to what? That other qareen or other qareens, right? And in order to find the property. That's al-Arraf, the fortune teller. Then you have something called al-Rammal. In English, they translate it as geomancer. Obviously, this is a word most of us have never heard before. I certainly had not heard it before. Geomancer, basically, is a person who claims knowledge of future events by interpreting certain markings on the ground. Or they will take sand or soil or rocks and throw them in the air. And when they land, they'll land what? In a certain pattern. And then they'll claim to read what? Read the pattern. Why is it called Ar-Ramal? Because Ar-Ramal from Ar-Ramal. Ramal is what? Sand. So they use sand. So since they use sand, they're called what? Ar-Ramal. But last but not least, Al-Munajjim. Al-Munajjim, which is the astrologer. And we talked about that. The astrologer is the one who claims to use the celestial bodies to determine future events, right? So what's a common example of that in our modern culture? The zodiac signs and the horoscopes, right? And unfortunately, some Muslims, what? They actually read these and believe in the contents of those. We're going to talk about how dangerous that is, to the point that I remember I was I was doing some counseling with someone, and they had like a lot of issues. And in the course of me talking to them, the person said, yes, I'm a Libra. And, Libras are like this and like this. It shows what? I'm reading up on this and I'm believing it. I believe that my personality is a certain way. I believe that my situation is a certain way. And I believe that I'm going to turn the corner and things are going to get better for me because of the aligning of the celestial bodies, because I'm a Libra, etc., and so on. But so all of these different examples that we gave, all of these forms of divination have the same ruling as a sihr. They have the same ruling. They're what? Prohibited. They're haram. And the individuals who practice them have the same ruling of those who practice sorcery. They have the same ruling of a sahir. They have the same ruling of a sahir. طيب. So what is the ruling of the sahir? A sorcerer may be considered a disbeliever if the form of sorcery that he uses and the methods that he uses are blasphemous, if they are a form of disbelief, if they are kufri. So there are different ways. So if a person, for example, sought the help of the shayateen, and committed acts of shirk, for example, then that person, that sahir, that particular sorcerer, will be deemed a disbeliever. طيب. Now the next question comes, okay, we said a sihr is haram, and we said that some sihr is disbelief. So what would be the penalty in an Islamic country ruled by the laws of Islam for a sahir, for a person who what? Practiced sorcery. The penalty for sorcery in Islamic countries ruled by Islamic law is death, is execution. Death by, the penalty is death. طيب, a number of evidences for this. For example, Umar al-Khattab, he once, while he was the Khalifa, he wrote to a particular province. He said, أَنِ اقْتُلُوا كُلَّ سَاحِرٍ وَسَاحِرَةٍ. He wrote to them saying, kill every witch, male or female. So Bujala, the one who was present when that letter was received, he said, فَقَتَلْنَا ثَلَاث سَوَاحِرٍ. So we killed three witches. طيب, also Hafsa, the daughter of Umar radiallahu anhuma, it has been reported that she commanded or ordered that a servant girl of hers who cast a spell on her be killed. And it's also been authentically reported from Jundub, another Sahabi from the Prophet ﷺ, أنه قتل ساحرا, that he killed a witch or a sorcerer. And it's also been narrated from him that he said, حد الساحر ضربة بالسيف, that the punishment, the penalty for a sorcerer is that he be stricken, or that his head be taken by the safe, by a sword. And Ibn Qudama, he mentioned in Al-Mughni, he said, كل هذه النقولات, he said, فلم ينكر فكان إجماعا. فلم ينكر فكان إجماعا. He said that you'll notice that all these narrations from a number of the Sahaba, a number of them, we mentioned three, but a number of them narrated this or engaged in this or spoke of this, and there's no one who disapproved of what they said or held a contending view. He said, فَكَانَ إِجْمَعًا, and therefore it's the agreement of the early Muslims and companions that the penalty for practicing sorcery is death. Okay, it's the death penalty. Now, does this apply to the people who practice sleight of hand? Does it apply to them?
No.
Like David Copperfield or something like that? No, it does not. It doesn't apply to the people who practice sleight of hand. But people who practice that form of magic, right? That form of magic are prohibited from doing so. And it's something that Islam still considers to be what? Haram, even though it doesn't reach the level of the type of sihr that will cause a person to be what? To lose their life and potentially be considered a disbeliever. They're prohibited. Why? Because our religion does what? It closes the door that can lead to what? To every haram. It doesn't just prohibit the haram, but prohibits everything that could lead to haram. So now think about it. You have seen people play card tricks, right? You've seen people with the coin and look, it's in my hand. Now it's not in my hand. Oh, look, it's behind your ear. We've seen that. It's all sleight of hand. But we've also seen people who will do card tricks and then say the card is in your pocket. And then you reach in your pocket and it's what? It's that card. Okay, now that right there, that's not sleight of hand. Okay, something is happening. Perhaps a person is being aided by what? The jinn. If we allow this and we say that this is also allowed by necessity, then we start to allow things that actually open the door for us to what? Allow the magic which involves seeking the aid of the jinn and the evil spirits. طيب. So that's prohibited. Last but not least, طيب. Last but not least, and this is important too, is the ruling of visiting the diviners, the ruling of visiting those who practice divination, practice foretelling the future, etc. So basically the ruling will depend on the intention of the person, the belief of the person who visits them. And by extension, it also applies to people who do what? They read horoscopes and those types of things and believe in the different forms of astrology. طيب, suppose a person just went to one of these people didn't give any credence to what they said and didn't believe what they said, but just went to kind of like see what it was. What do these people do? Just out of curiosity. Didn't really listen and didn't believe anything they said. That person would have done something haram, would have done something prohibited. It's not allowed for them to do that. And the proof for that is the hadith collected by Muslim on the authority of Muawiyah ibn Hakam as-Sulami, in which he came to the Prophet and he said, Inna minna rijalan ya'tun al-kuhan. He said, O Messenger of Allah, there are from us people who go to these diviners. They go to them to see what they're going to say. So the Prophet said, فَلَا تَأْتِهِمْ. He said, don't go to them. He prohibited him. And whenever the Prophet prohibits us from anything, it means that doing that is haram. طيب. The second category are those who visit them and they affirm. They visit, they listen, and they actually believe what they say. So they'll say, for example, yes, I know where your family heirloom is. I know where your great-grandmother's necklace is. I know who stole it. And they will get this knowledge from them. They'll believe them, but they'll believe that this knowledge is not something that they gathered or reached independently. Rather, it's knowledge that they got from what? From the shayateen. They believe that they don't have independent knowledge of the unseen, but they still believe whatever they say. That, yeah, if he says, for example, Frank stole, and this is his address, they believe that. They believe Frank stole it. This is his address. If I go there, I'll find it. They believe that. But they believe they got the knowledge by way of the shayateen. That person, there are two punishments for that, two penalties for that. The first one is that their prayer will not be accepted for 40 days. The second one is that they've committed a type of kufr that doesn't reach the level of leaving Islam, al-kufr al-asghar, the minor disbelief. The proof for that, number one, is the hadith collected by Ahmed, in which the Prophet said, "Man ata arrafan fasaddaqahu bima yaqul lam tuqbalahu salatun arba'in yawman." He said, whoever goes to a diviner and believes what he says, his prayer will not be accepted for 40 days. We know he didn't become a disbeliever. Why? Because if he became a disbeliever, his prayer wouldn't be accepted until what? Until he returned to Islam. طيب. Second thing the Prophet said in another hadith, he said, "Man ata arrafan aw kahinan fasaddaqahu bima yaqul faqad kafara bima unzila ala Muhammad." He said, whoever goes to a diviner or a fortune teller and believes what he says, then he has disbelieved in what Muhammad brought. In what? In a minor sense, not in a major sense. Why? Because his prayer won't be accepted for 40 days. If he was a total disbeliever, his prayer wouldn't be accepted at all. طيب. The third category is the one who visits and affirms. But he affirms, he believes what he tells him. But he believes that he reached this knowledge independently. That this person has the ability, some type of supernatural ability, to gain knowledge of the unseen, independent of the shayateen. He has knowledge of the unseen. The person who goes to these people and believes that, then that person has disbelieved. He's become a total disbeliever. And the proof for that are all those verses where Allah tells us that He's the only one who knows the unseen. Right? For example, وَعِنْدَهُ مَفَاتِحُ الْغَيْبِ لَا يَعْلَمُهَا إِلَّا هُ. And He possesses knowledge of the unseen, the keys of the unseen. No one knows them except Him. So if a person believes that the diviner knows the unseen, independent of the shayateen, then he is disbelieving in what? In the Quran itself. Because no one knows the unseen independently except Allah. Then last but not least from the categories is the one who visits the diviners to investigate and to expose them. And this is something which only the scholars should do. Because someone like us goes and thinks, yeah, I'm going to show them, and they'll twist us up like a pretzel and have us disbelieving in Allah. But if a person is knowledgeable and capable and qualified, he goes to expose the diviner. This is permissible, but again, permissible only for what? For the scholars. And with that, brothers and sisters, we have actually summarized those 4 chapters and still have a little time for any questions, comments, or discussion. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد. تفضل حبيب.
Was one of those chapters you summarized 27? Or no?
That's a nushra. I didn't touch on it, but if you have a question about it, we'll go ahead and deal with it.
Yeah, because I'm reading in it here, and I don't want to get ahead of this, not included in it. But it's talking about here where they're talking about if you feel like you've been affected by a sorcerer, where it's permissible to go to a sorcerer to be cured.
Yeah, so some of the scholars, there's three different opinions about the issue. About fakk as-sihr bis-sihr, curing or removing a spell by way of another spell. So the first opinion is that it's jaiz mutlaqan, it's absolutely permissible. And some of the early Muslims, they held this opinion, like Ibn Mas'ud and his companions, his students. They held this opinion, and they said what is prohibited is the magic which is bar, where a person seeks to harm someone else. But the person who is trying to relieve it, once he's been affected by it, that person is not seeking to harm, but seeking to what? To help or to benefit. And so they allowed it in that case. If you've been you've been affected by it or afflicted with it, then you could do it. That's the first opinion. Second opinion is that it's absolutely haram. It's absolutely prohibited because a sihr is disbelief and the sahir is a disbeliever, and so on and so forth. And also they use the hadith of Mas'ud in which the Prophet ﷺ said, he said, Inna Allaha lam yaj'al shifa'akum fima harram alaykum. Allah has not placed your cure in what he has prohibited. The final opinion, or the third opinion, is that it's permissible in the darura. It's permissible in cases of necessity, absolute necessity. And obviously they use all of those narrations that indicate that what is normally prohibited will become permissible in cases of what? Necessity. They also use certain instances where the sahir was not killed, and they use other proofs to show that in cases of necessity, it's permissible to lift a spell through what? Through another spell. And Allah knows best. The best opinion is the third opinion. It's permissible for ad-darura, that if there's a need, because as some of the early Muslims said, that only one sorcerer can remove the magic of what? Of another sorcerer. So if it's a situation where a person, for example, can't be intimate with his wife and he knows that it's because of what? Some magic somebody put on him. And there's someone who says, I can remove the spell. They're saying in a case of necessity like that, he could what? He could go to them. And so that's basically a summary of the last chapter.
That's kind of a slippery slope.
There's no question.
If I think something's wrong with me, I'm going to go to this person.
No, it can be if every time you think something's wrong with you. It can be every time somebody, and only, again, in case of darura. And when is it darura? Darura is when there's no legal, lawful means to achieve your objective. That's number one. And the second one is only to the extent necessary to remove what? To remove the necessity. So these are the conditions Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed in the Quran. When he said, what does he say? He says, غَيْرُ بَاغٍ وَلَا عَادٍ فَلَا إِثْمَ عَلَيْهِ. Right? He says that this engaging in the haram is only permissible for the one who does it غَيْرُ بَاغٍ, he doesn't want to do it, but he does it out of necessity. Okay, to the extent of what? The need. وَلَا عَادٍ, and not what? Using it beyond what is necessary. Only in the case of what? Only to the extent of what? Of the darura. So yeah, but again, like I said, it's three different opinions, and Allah knows best. The best one is in cases of darura, it would be permissible. And like I said, this is a real thing that happens, particularly in Muslim-dominant countries, where people put spells on people and try to turn a man away from his wife, all right, or turn a man towards his wife, and different things like that. And so some people become in a situation where it's debilitating, and their only recourse is to go to someone who's skilled in these matters and seek their assistance in getting it off. Now, a person says, okay, well, how can you go to, they say, for example, the sahir, the one who does it, is a disbeliever. Okay, we're not talking about his disbelief. He is a disbeliever, there's no question. But that doesn't make the one who goes to him to get cured out of necessity, that doesn't make him a disbeliever, and doesn't make what he's doing haram. Like, any other questions?
Why couldn't you just, I mean, there's evidence in the hadith, like, recite certain ayats from the Quran, certain things, like, shouldn't we do that first?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But again, what we said was, in case of darura, what does darura mean? Darura means that you've exhausted the legal means, or the legal means aren't available to you. And the only thing available to solve the problem is the illegal thing. It's like in the case of a person being in a barren desert, and the only thing he finds to eat is a dead boar, which is a pig. So yeah, in that case, he's allowed to partake of it. Why? Because if he doesn't, he'll die. It becomes extreme necessity. He can partake of it, provided that this will achieve the objective, which is preserving his life, which it will. And he can only take the amount necessary to preserve his life. So he couldn't, for example, just have a feast on it. But he could take a portion of it and continue his journey and eat from it as he needed to. So now apply that to the case of the person who has this spell put on them. Let's say that they exhausted those legal means, that they did everything that was legally at their disposal. They did ruqyah, they went to someone to read on them, they did all those things, and none of those things worked for them. And they are in a debilitated state. They're in a very awful situation. And this now will become, in that case, because they have sought and pursued the legal means, and those legal means have been exhausted. And now the only thing that remains for them is what? Is the illegal. If they did the illegal to the extent necessary. So for example, he went, the person did whatever they do, and the spell was removed. That would be legal. Suppose he said, you know what? Since this person put a spell on me, can you put a spell on them? That would then be what? It would be illegal. But if he does what is necessary to remove the darura, to remove the necessity, to remove the situation that brought about his need for this haram thing, it would be legal. Legal. Any other questions?
Do you want to?
Yeah, we should talk about that. Okay, so inshallah ta'ala, next week we'll be doing the class between the Maghrib and Isha. So the time change kind of came, I won't say out of nowhere, because obviously this happens every year in September going to October, but just the times got on top of us, and we didn't have the foresight to basically plan accordingly. So we kept having this flux. We went from, I think we were doing it at like 7, and we went to 6:30, and then we went to 6:15 because the time was going back so fast. And we weren't able to really get our footing and stay with a specific time for an extended period of time. So now we're at a point now, I think, where Maghrib is late enough and Isha is early enough where we can do between Maghrib and Isha, and it won't be a huge inconvenience on everybody. So Maghrib is good because it gives us time to get home from work and get settled in whatever we do. And Isha is about 8:30, 8:45. And so we can still be done with the class and be home before the hour gets too late. So inshallah ta'ala, that being said, starting next Monday, bi'idhnillah, we'll be going from Maghrib to Isha. Maghrib will be about, 7?
It's like 7, and Isha's like 8:06.
Right.
Like an hour.
So we'll be here for about an hour from between 7-ish to a little bit after 8, inshallah ta'ala. Any other questions, comments, or critiques? Going once, going twice, gone. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بارك الله فيكم.